Hey tubers, welcome back for another adventure. And if you remember the last time we went to work on this thing, I wanted to give it a cold start. And the problem was, as I was attempting to start it, pulling on the old ripcord over there, it kept pulling back on me. So I just want to show you what I think is going on and just do a little video about all-terrain vehicles, motorcycles, whatever, that kick back as you're trying to start them. Kind of help troubleshooting. Okay, let's start right at the beginning. This is your typical internal combustion engine, right? Crankshaft goes around, piston goes up and down, all kinds of great things happen. And we're going to be talking about a four-stroke engine. So, first part of that is intake. Top dead center is where the piston starts and it goes to bottom dead center. Intake valve open, exhaust valve closed. Basically what you're doing is you are inhaling your gas-air mixture, gasoline-air mixture, your combustible mixture. Next thing that happens, compression stroke. Your piston goes from bottom dead center to top dead center. Both valves are closed, right? So you're fighting it there. Next comes power, right? As soon as you cross top dead center, or slightly before, just before you cross top dead center, the spark goes off and you go from top dead center to bottom dead center, and you have both your valves closed for that, right? Then you have exhaust. That's where you go from bottom dead center to top dead center. Your intake valve is closed, your exhaust valve is opened, and that's where stuff gets exhausted, right? That's where you hear the noise and the smoke comes out the tailpipe. So now let's talk about why is it kicking back. So they kick back when your spark happens a little too soon. So picture as your piston's coming up, your compression stroke, it's coming up, and let's say just before it gets to top dead center, right, you shoot the spark off. So you're pulling the string, you got the compression coming up, and before top dead center, your spark goes off. What's it going to do? That little explosion inside your engine is going to push the piston down, but it's going to push the piston down against the rope, against your arm, or if it's a Kickstarter, against the Kickstarter. So whose job is it to put the spark in exactly the right place? Well, you got your pulse generator, which is triggered, and you have your CDI unit. Your CDI unit actually sets this up to get your maximum efficiency out of your engine. Given that the second the spark goes off, it does take a little bit of time, milliseconds, right, for this explosion to get going. So typically, when you're not starting your engine, right, as your piston's coming up, just a millisecond before you hit top dead center, the spark goes off and the whole thing goes around. That's why sometimes if you're pulling the string too slowly, it pulls back against you because you're not going fast enough to take this thing over the top. The spark fires as you're still coming toward the top and it pulls back. But there are things that could go wrong here also. The first thing that could go wrong, very, very common, especially with lawnmowers, by the way, you break the keyway, right? You break this thing here. Suddenly your flywheel can turn around a little bit. Well, if your flywheel turns around such that it advances the spark too much, every time you go to start it, right, it fires on the wrong side of top dead center and it pulls back, right? It pulls back on you. And the reason why it's real common with lawnmowers is when you hit a rock, right, you break the keyway. So one thing that could go wrong. The other thing that could go wrong is your CDI could mess up. For whatever reason, instead of keeping the spark when you're trying to start it, more toward top dead center, right? It starts advancing it like it would do if the engine's running. Remember, if the engine's running, you kind of want the spark a little bit more and a little more with the higher RPMs. You want it a little bit more before top dead center, because once again, it takes a while for the explosion to fully detonate. And if you're going really, really fast, you want to make sure that you're crossing the top just at the right time to put the spark there and have the whole thing going off, right? Have the whole explosion going off. So if your CDI messes up, you could get in trouble that way. I don't think my Bayou has either of those problems. And let me tell you what problem I think it does have. When you think of an engine, you have to think of timing, and all timing has to do with where is my piston, right? You have all the spark timing, which I just talked about. When is it triggered by the pulse generator, and when does your CDI put it where it should be, right? So that's one kind of timing. The other kind of timing you have is valve timing. If your valve timing is really off, right, these valves are open when your piston comes up, and you could damage your engine. You could, if it's just slightly off, not too much, 3 clicks out perhaps, you bend the intake valve or you bend the exhaust valve. If you're further out than that, and I've seen this happen with 200X motors, you're flying down a hill, you go to pass your buddy, you're winding it wide open, and your timing chain breaks. Sometimes it'll come around, it'll hit your intake valve, or it'll jump time, it'll hit your intake valve, and it'll hit your exhaust valve, right? Because as you're going down the hill, right, your clutch is engaged, you're moving, your flywheel is turning, and you hammer your valves. But let's just say, back to valve timing, you're only a click or two out, and it's pulling back. And I wrote down the example on the bottom. If you advanced your valve timing just a little bit, so that your exhaust valve closes too soon, and right now you're on the exhaust stroke. The engine is not running, so you still have, in my case I was using starting fluid, so you still have starting fluid, you still have oxygen in there, right? But let's close the exhaust valve a little too soon on the exhaust stroke. Well, the exhaust valve closes, you build a little bit of compression, and right, just as I'm crossing over the top, right, my intake valve has not opened, right, my exhaust valve is closed, so I have a little bit of compression in there, and it fires. What it'll do is it'll pull back, and that's what the Bayou was doing as I was trying to start it. The timing was far enough out where it was allowing a little bit of compression to build, but it wasn't build such that it gave it spark just before top dead centers. I was pulling it over, right, and it would pull back on me, but it wasn't so far out that the intake valve opened when the piston wasn't opened. The intake valve wasn't fully opened when I had the piston all the way to the top, that it got damaged. So that's what I believe is going on with this thing. I'm 1 click out, right? Far enough out where on some engines they're really hard to start, and some engines they just pull back. If they're 1 click the other way, if they're 1 click delayed, sometimes you lose compression, right? Because the exhaust valve is opened up a little late. And a lot of times you don't build up a full intake worth of gas and gasoline and air mixture, and it doesn't fire off. So your valve timing is kind of important to have a nice reliable engine, right? 1 click too far advanced for your valve timing. A lot of times it'll fight you. If you do get it to start, it'll just be one of those that kick back, that really fight hard, right? It pulls the string back, or it kicks back if it's a motorcycle. If you're 1 step the other way, a lot of times they'll start, but they'll be hard to start and they'll be weak, right? If you go 2 clicks, it's really going to pull back. You could damage the valve. 3 clicks, you probably will damage the intake valve, right? And 2 or 3 clicks in the other direction, once again, loss of power, hard to start. So here we have it, the 3 reasons why an engine pulls back or kicks back when trying to start. Keyway broken, flywheel timing is off, spark will be too soon. You're failed a CDI. Sometimes on these bikes, you know, I get them or somebody else gets them and they put a different capacitive discharge unit on it, right? So you got the wrong CDI, you got a failed CDI, CDI ground is no good. That could sometimes cause you trouble, or CDI over voltage. Sometimes people try to start these things with a huge truck style jump pack on it, and that over voltage could make your CDI trigger too soon also. So do be careful with over voltage. I just discussed the valve timing. 1 or 2 notches too advanced. One other thing, some engines are set up where that valve timing is really, it's before top dead center and perhaps slightly too much top dead center. Typically they do that with high performance engines to get the maximum performance out of it. A lot of times they do not have a butterfly type choke, a restrictive type choke. So when you give them full throttle, they kick back. Basically, you have the same situation. On those kind of engines, when you jump on that Kickstarter or pull on that rope, you really got to mean it, because you got to carry it over that top dead center. So when it sparks, you're on the right side of it. If you're on the wrong side of it, once again, it's going to kick back. We got a beautiful day going on here, and I just wanted to take a moment to talk about a friend of mine. He passed on due to this recent plague that we're all trying to avoid. My friend Tom, I knew him from work. Really a great guy. He was the guy that would be in the break room telling a story, and everybody in the break room would be listening. Occasionally, he would even get in trouble for that. Tom's typical story would always begin with, "You're not going to believe this. I met this woman." A lot of times after that, the cops or a jealous boyfriend or unsuspected camera would be involved, and the story would go on. We would all laugh. A lot of times he'd start one of his stories and he would just be saying, "Hey, Harvey, I got a story for you." And he'd start telling me. And before I knew it, there'd be a crowd around him, because he was so animated and he was so great at telling these stories. He was so much fun. I had not seen him much since I retired. Occasionally I would run across him at Home Depot. And when I looked at his obituary, I realized he was actually a couple of years older than I am. I don't know how Tom caught the plague. I don't know which version of the plague he caught. Really doesn't matter. He got it, and unfortunately, it got him. Took a few days in the hospital, but he passed on. So I just wanted to take a few moments to tell you guys, once again, if it's a beautiful day like this, make sure you get out and have some fun. And for everyone, make sure you're a little careful. It's tough if you're the one that happens to be passing, but it's real tough on the folks you leave behind. Take care.